Hey everybody, I did a little more check-in on that question I had yesterday about executive orders and when are they in effect, from start to finish. That's really my question, because I think they could be potentially scary if they're unconstitutional and yet they are out there being enforced, even before there's a judicial review of some kind. Well, these executive orders, they are in effect 30 days after they're printed in the Federal Registry. And from then on, they're in effect until they're overruled by the courts or, either, done away with by Congress in some way. They write a law or whatever, or another president. They can nullify it. So that's three ways. But the problem I have is with the judicial way, because it takes so long. It does take long, and it's the same with laws, executive orders or laws. The impression people have is that there's some judicial review right out of the gate. And that's not the case. A law or executive order is signed, and then off it goes into the world until it encounters a problem with people who say this is infringing on my rights or some other type of thing like that. So these things will be in effect. This is the case. They are in effect until the court does away with them. It says they're either unconstitutional or in some cases it's contradicts with another law or something like that. And so I did find something. There's not really much on here you can find, but I did find something on eNotes, and I'll just read it. It's kind of boring, but we'll see. Okay, limits on judicial review and interpretation. While judicial review and interpretation are powerful, they have limits. The strongest limit is the constitutional requirement that the Supreme Court decide only cases and controversies. The Supreme Court and lower federal courts have the power to resolve only those cases and controversies listed in the Constitution. This means that if someone files a federal lawsuit that does not come from this list of cases and controversies, the court cannot hear the case. It also means that if a court passes a law of which the Supreme Court disapproves, the court cannot strike down a law on its own. Instead, it must wait until someone files an appropriate case or controversy to challenge the law. That's that kind of thing. These things end up going, they end up getting signed and out they go. That's what's going on. I had the impression as a child or out of, when I was younger, for some reason I thought laws get looked at before they go off, before they're even signed. And I don't know, for some reason that idea is still in there, still implanted in my brain. It's in there floating around. So that's why I was curious whether this executive orders are enforceable right off the bat. And they are. So even if they're stinky and even if they're unconstitutional, they can be put into effect. Okay, so let's say one of these executive orders gets by Congress. They can make a law that undoes this. They can do it right away, even before it even gets into effect. That's 30 days from the time it's printed in the registry. So even before it hits the street, Congress can act on this thing and get rid of it. Let's say it gets by Congress and it goes to whatever agencies it applies to, say the ATF. Now it's up to the head of the ATF, say if it just applies to the ATF, I don't know, whatever. Let's just say it's one agency, make it simple. It falls on the head of the ATF to decide, is this constitutional or not? I think he must swear an oath too. I think everybody does swear an oath to the Constitution. So in that case, it falls to him to disobey. He has to. Okay? But, I mean, legally he has to. But nobody has to do anything. He can do whatever he wants. Okay? So maybe he doesn't obey. All right. Now it falls to his subordinates, who also took an oath. So presumably, at some point down the line, someone's going to say, this is, unconstitutional, and I'm required to disobey this order, and they'll get fired, and then they'll sue the government because it was unconstitutional. So it takes time, and then it'll work its way through the courts, and eventually it will be overturned because it's unconstitutional, or for some other reason. And I'm going to cite that one that Bill Clinton did in 1995, March 8th, 1995, Executive Order 12954, and that was about striking replacement workers, saying the federal government cannot contract with companies that hire permanent replacement workers when there's a strike. And but that law was in effect for a year and a half. That executive order, it had the effect of law, so it's a law. So it was in effect for a year and a half before it was overturned by the court. That's one of two executive orders overturned by courts. Two. So not too many. And so that's a year and a half. How long is it going to take if President Obama comes up with some stinky gun grab legislation or something as bad in some other way? How long is it going to take? This is my question. Before it's done away with. It could last long enough to start a civil war. Who knows? That's my problem. People are out there saying, well, executive orders don't do this and they don't do that. Well, this is my problem. He can write something that is unconstitutional, even though he's not supposed to, and it can make it out the door past Congress, and the Supreme Court probably won't rule on it for months anyway. And by then, all hell could break loose, or not. So don't just presume everything is looked at and is constitutional or makes even sense just because it comes out of the White House or because it comes out of Congress. I've watched the News Hour for years on PBS, and if you listen to that show, they're always talking about court cases, and this is unconstitutional, whatever, and it takes forever for these things to happen, and then things are ruled unconstitutional years later. So, that right there tells you the stuff doesn't come out of Congress squeaky clean. They just do what they can, and if it doesn't fit right, it gets fixed later. They can't, go over everything with a fine-tooth comb right off the bat, and they don't. That's why they have rulings later on these things, because there is no review before they leave Congress or before Bill Clinton or whichever president signs it. It's not reviewed like that. It gets done later. So there you go. The president is going to unveil his new ideas tomorrow, so this should be interesting. Okay, peace to everybody. Stop.